What's up, everybody? Jensen Cummings here. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. Today's Best Served Podcast 395. We'll be talking with Levi Noe of Fuel and Iron Realty. We'll be talking about restaurant build out costs, so many hidden costs, so many things that we don't know, we don't understand because we're so used to running the restaurant. Not everything that it takes to build out the restaurant. And Levi brought a ton of value in the article, 6 questions with Levi Noe. So make sure, get into the comments, link into that, and go check that out. It's going to break down a lot more really important things, understanding a lookbook and kind of your business plan, understanding what landlords are looking for. It's important for you to understand who a tenant rep is and what that means. So make sure you get in there. If you are thinking about opening a restaurant, you need to watch this episode. You need to read that article 100%. All right, let's bring in Levi now. Levi, good to see you.
Hey, Jensen. Really appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. Love what you all are doing at Fuel and Iron. And shout out, and we'll link it up to Fuel and Iron Food Hall opening in Pueblo, Colorado. What you're doing down there is just changing the game. And I want people to know about that. But then you also, and then you have a bar that's representing Fuel and Iron and representing Pueblo in Denver as well. So we got a lot of stuff to link up. But then also your tenant rep, right? Specializing food and beverage. So you help and support restaurateurs looking to get in there first or expand their footprint. So break it down for us a little bit. Fuel and Iron Realty, what are you all about?
We are all about food and beverage. We just think it's the bars, the breweries, the restaurants, the coffee shops, all that stuff is kind of what gives a city character. And it's what we're passionate about. There's a whole lot of areas that you can focus on in commercial real estate. And we kind of zoned in on what we love the most. And we think it's a pretty cool opportunity to build the city we love with awesome F&B concepts.
And it's pretty unique that you are exclusively, right, or pretty much on the tenant rep side, right? So a lot of times you have people that are repping the landlord and the space itself, and they might dabble or do a little bit of tenant rep or have people within their firm that specialize. With Fuel and Iron, that's your bread and butter. You want to be on the tenant side. You want to be representing, supporting the chefs, the restaurateurs, the brewers, the coffee shop owners. Why is that part of F&B so important to you rather than being one who has a listing for spaces?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say we're probably about 90% tenant rep.
Pretty high, yeah.
And we do like our landlord assignments. We're just kind of selective of who we work with. But on the tenant side, it's just important to us that these restaurants, these bars, these breweries get representation, because it's hard to find real estate. It's hard to negotiate terms. It's hard to get all this. It's just hard to be in the F&B world. And it's hard to describe because it doesn't make a whole lot of logical sense in terms of commercial real estate, because there's a lot of other areas that are, for lack of better words, it's kind of a challenging.
There's easier, more lucrative sides to the business.
Yeah,
that's basically what it is.
Quite like that, but
I'm happy to say, here's the thing. It's really easy to find a landlord and have those relationships with developers and be able to find the spaces and knowing when space is coming available. That's a much simpler flow of communication. For you have to be, you're building like a farm system. You have to find, the line cook who's working at a restaurant currently, the sous chef who's working at a restaurant, the assistant brewer, and have them somehow know that you exist, that you're here to support them, that you know your shit, and that when they're ready, you're somebody that they need to talk to. So it's incredibly challenging. So I want to make sure and point that out. That's, I think, an important aspect of this. I will toot that horn. You don't have to.
Yeah.
For us to understand. And you mentioned the article as well. Everyone get in there, because sometimes we're like, I don't even know how to start this process. And I mentioned that I've done this, and others, we just call the number that's pasted in the window of the empty space, being like, oh, that's the real estate broker. This must be how it works. In fact, you are calling whoever is representing the landlord, which they have the landlord's interest at heart, and you want to make sure that you are individually represented by a tenant reps, and that's again 90% of what you do. All
Yeah.
right, I want to get into some build out costs. Obviously, you're not the contractor's going to do the work, and you're not looking at supply chain, all those things. So we're not going to get into the nitty gritty details there. What you are seeing is a kind of a lack of understanding from the potential restaurateur side to what's actually happening within the space. And so you mentioned one of the first things that somebody needs to do when they're looking at a space is just walk through with a contractor and like really map out what it's going to take. Why, how, give us some background on why that step of process is important.
Yeah, I mean, you don't know what you don't know.
There you go.
So we will walk through a space and we can point out things, and we have a pretty good idea of what's what, but we always like to just say we're not contractors. We don't know all these really fine details that make all the difference. So you walk a space with a contractor, they can point out all these little things like, hey, this bathroom is not ADA compliant. You're gonna have to. That's gonna cost you $50,000. They'll, especially if you. Well, that's a ballpark, but bathrooms can be expensive.
Hey, I want to shock people a little bit to go, this is
Yeah,
not easy.
it's
Like,
not.
it's not easy. Turnkey is a myth. There's like no such thing as just like walking in the door and opening the doors the next day. It just doesn't happen. So
Always
$50,000 plus or
budget,
minus, that's okay. They
always
need
budget
to hear
higher.
it, Levi.
Yeah, always budget higher, and so the contractor can walk through and just give you a better idea, especially if you can find an F&B specific contractor, which we have a bunch of connections, and it really does it just in the same aspect of like it matters who your real estate broker is, and if they know the food and beverage world, it matters that your contractor knows food and beverage too, because if you just have a contractor who does mostly retail or office, there's a whole heck of a lot that goes into building restaurant specific, bar specific build outs.
Mm-hmm. All
So
right. And we also talked a little bit about kind of budgeting for square footage for build out cost, right? The bigger your space, the more rent's going to be, the more it's going to cost to build out that space. I think we're seeing trends towards that. You mentioned kind of a range, at least a place to start. So let's throw that number out there and let's kind of dissect that a little bit.
yes, to definitely need some dissection. But I just did an interview for the Colorado Real Estate Journal. I was writing a similar article to what we're talking about, and I talked with Kyle Fabra, who's got a company called Frontline Design and Development, and he specializes in all food and beverage across the nation. His big average number was $250 to $350 per square foot. Now that can range. You could see much less, you could see much higher, but that's a good number to kind of keep in your head. So
yeah, and I want everyone to understand. So this is an important place for you to be able to budget those numbers, because we think it's going to cost less. And the reality is, when people ask me, how much is it going to cost? How much money do I need? My answer is always the same. It's more money. Being undercapitalized is one of the major pitfalls that new restaurateurs run to. We try to bootstrap, and I'm going to raise $100,000. If you think you need 100,000, you need to get 250. You think you need 250, you better get 750, because it's always going to be harder, takes longer, costs more money. I want everyone to really understand that. That's part of what you're highlighting. And we've heard whispers. I think a lot of people in the restaurant have seen supply chain issues within kind of food purchasing. The construction side's having the same thing. I mean, we're hearing delays of dozen months, 9 months on things. We're hearing that 30% cost of just raw materials is up if you can even get some materials. So I think that's some things we have to make sure we really understand that. Another aspect that I wanted to touch on a little bit is when I'm thinking about how much I need to budget for my build out, I'm also thinking about where that money's coming from. And we talk about a lot the relationship with the landlord being crucial. And TIA falls into that potentially. Tenant Improvement Allowance. Make sure you know that phrase. Make sure if ever you can get that. Like, I know restaurateurs like Frank Bonanno that basically bankroll the whole opening of new places just for making sure that the TI is ridiculously high. He'll worry about the rent on the back end later. So what is that? How do I get lots of it? What is it used for? Break that down a little bit, because it plays out into build out a lot, because it's for improvement of the space itself.
Yeah. So, I mean, very simplified, the tenant improvement allowance, we usually just say TI, is what the landlord is going to give you to build out a space. And that number could be $0 to $250 per square foot. It really depends. But one other thing to think about is it's not necessarily they're handing you a check and saying, go for it. You actually are gonna have to find the funds to do the build out, and then they will pay you back once the build out is done and liens are waived and leases started. It all depends on what is defined in the lease, but this is a really, really important aspect because not to keep touting why a tenant rep broker is so important, but this is where it comes in, because if you're working and you don't have anybody representing you, it really, all of these deal factors are going to come into play. So even before you sign a lease, you're working through a letter of intent, an LOI, and you're talking through these deal points. How much free rent are we going to get? How much TI can we get? How much landlord work can we get? And if you don't have anybody kind of doing the battle for you with the landlord or the landlord broker, then you're kind of just going to get the deal you're going to get, and you don't know necessarily what to ask for or where to. It's all just kind of pulling levers.
Right. Yeah, I think what you mentioned is key. It's a reimbursal, right? That money is not up front, because I definitely heard that somebody's like, oh, we're going to get $150,000 in TI. That doesn't mean you now have $150,000 on the front end of that project. You have to spend that $150,000 of improvement on the space. They're going to want to see those receipts, right? They're going to want to know that whatever might have happened that improved the facade of the space, your sealing the concrete floors, anything like that that's going to improve the space, because the landlord then says, oh, now you're upping the value of my space for 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road when your lease is up. So it's really important to understand that element. So yeah, people are just you got to know what you're getting yourself into. Anything else that you've seen right now that are kind of factors playing into anticipating the build out cost, obviously building up their budget? Anything else, kind of last thoughts on the topic?
Well, the restaurant buyouts, touching on that, because what we're seeing a lot of is second gen is so desired because construction is so expensive, permitting takes so long. So a lot of restaurateurs who are trying to get out of their current space, they're seeing that they can ask for a buyout, and that doesn't mean buying the real estate. That is buy out their FF&E, and sometimes they're numbers based on revenue. Sometimes it's just like, we put in this much money into the space, this is what we want to get back for it. So a lot of times with the second gen restaurants, it's there's been a buyout. We've seen that as a bigger trend.
Yeah. And I'll just give a little bit more context there. Basically, this means somebody has had a barbecue place there for the last 6 years. They're on a 10-year lease. They want to get out of the business. You're like, that's a perfect location for my pizza place. But they want to make sure that they get bought out, let's say. You could either start a new concept or potentially buy the entire business. So there's a cost associated there. There's also the potential challenge where you need to make sure that there's language in their current lease that they're able to actually have that transfer, or are you negotiating a completely new lease? So there's some complications there. Again, why you need to have Levi or tenant rep in there to make sure that you understand what you're getting yourself into. So that's great, Levi. We need a lot more of this. All right, everybody, that's it. Levi Noe of Fuel and Iron Realty. Again, check out the article. Levi brought a lot of valuable information there. We're going to have some link ups so that people can kind of check out what you all do, because I think it's important to understand. And I appreciate you being on.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Jensen.
All right. Take care. All right, everybody. That is it for this episode. Once again, this was Best Served Podcast 395 with Levi Noe of Fuel and Iron Realty on restaurant build out costs. I'm going to plug it again. Make sure and check out the article. And always, we are on Tuesdays at 4 p.m. Eastern time, 2 p.m. Mountain time with our episodes. And also always an article comes out with our guests, so we can go a little deeper, wider, also a little bio on there so you can learn a little bit more about Levi and what they do. All right, that is it. Appreciate you all. Cheers.